Hello, listeners. Welcome back to AI Data Bytes powered by Denodo. In part one of our discussion on the economics of agentic AI, we discussed with Dominic Sartorio about the hidden cost of intelligence. We explored why agentic AI can consume significantly more tokens than traditional AI interactions, why enterprise data complexity contributes to that cost, and how active context can help organizations provide AI with relevant, trusted, and governed information more efficiently. Today, we are going to take that conversation one step further. Because reducing the cost of AI isn't necessarily the same thing as generating a return from AI. And to delve deeper into this topic, joining me today is Errol Rodericks, Director of Product Marketing here at Denodo. Welcome, Errol. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you, Neha. It's good to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to this.
Me too. So let's get started then, Errol. So as we get into this topic, my first question for you is, are we perhaps using the term ROI too loosely when we talk about AI nowadays?
Yeah, as you're going to find, as we go through our discussion today, ROI, there's the I part of it, the investment, and then there's the return. Mm-hmm. When you come to talk about the return, it's a lot more than just minimizing tokens. Minimizing tokens is one step. So yes, we are using it a little bit loosely and we need to tighten that up. So that's what I'm looking forward to doing.
Interesting. Thank you, Errol. So in our previous token economics episode, we discussed how organizations can reduce unnecessary token consumption and lower the cost of running AI. But surely if we are reducing those costs, we are improving ROI as well, I believe?
Yeah, absolutely. But we're only improving one side of this equation. And that's really where I wanted to pick up the conversation from the last part that you did with Dominic. Dominic made a compelling argument about the cost of intelligence. Tokens cost money, compute costs money, retrieval costs money, everything costs money. Retries cost money, and moving unnecessary information into this context window we are developing costs money. And when you multiply all of that across hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of agentic tasks, architecture matters enormously. So token economics does matter, okay? But here's the question I think we now need to ask, okay? Is reducing the cost of AI actually the same thing as demonstrating ROI of AI? And I don't think it is. ROI has two sides. There's the investment, the I, and then there's the return, the R. So part one told us a great deal about the I and I. Now we need to talk about the R.
You make a great point there, Errol. So how important is token economics in that context then?
So I'm not saying that token economics is not important. It's quite the opposite. It's extremely important. But we need to understand what it tells us. Token economics helps answer, what does intelligence cost? Okay, it doesn't necessarily answer what is that intelligence worth. Imagine I have an AI application costing £1 million a year to operate. Through better architecture, better context management, maybe fewer retries as a result, I reduce that cost from 1 million to 500,000. That's excellent. I've saved 500,000. But suppose that application only generates £200,000 worth of measurable business value. It's still a good investment, but if you had possibly spent £2 million on that AI, but it generated £20 million of measurable value, well, you tell me which has the better economics, obviously the second one. So the distinction I'd make is cost optimization, yes, improves ROI, but it doesn't define ROI. And that's the shift I think enterprise leaders increasingly need to make.
Definitely. You made a great point there. Thanks, Errol. So if tokens and costs aren't enough, what should organizations actually be measuring then?
So ultimately, because there are several steps between consuming a token and creating business value, AI produces an output. That output needs to create some form of understanding. That understanding informs a decision. That decision leads to an action. That action produces an outcome. And that outcome creates, or potentially destroys if you get it wrong, economic value. So I think about the chain as AI output starts with from AI output to understanding, from understanding to decision, from decision to action, from action to outcome, and then to value. And the mistake is stopping too early in that chain. And that's what we need to measure. So, you ask me, what should we be measuring? You go beyond the tokens all the way down that chain from understanding to value.
Right. And in terms of measuring, like, how can we make this more tangible?
Well, the best way is to take an example. Let's take banking fraud. We could measure how many tokens the fraud agent consumed, how many cases it processed, how quickly it processed them. AI useful measures, all of these. But none of them tells me whether the bank actually achieved what it wanted. So the business question would be, to make this tangible, not how many tokens did we consume in getting this, how much fraud did we actually prevent in the end? And you can do the same for manufacturing. I don't ultimately care how many predictive maintenance reports AI generated. I want to know, did unplanned downtime go down? Did it fall? And for government, the measure isn't necessarily how quickly did AI summarize a case file. It might be, did we identify a vulnerable person earlier and intervene successfully, depending on the use case. So that's the shift from just basic AI activity and all the tokens that get consumed to an actual outcome, in this case, a business outcome.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing this, Errol. And I hear a lot of organizations justify AI investments through productivity, in terms of like hours saved, tasks automated, employees becoming more efficient.
Yeah.
Isn't that considered ROI then?
Well, it can certainly contribute to ROI. It is part of the ROI, but there's a danger of confusing productivity with actual realized value. So suppose AI saves an employee 5 hours a week. That's interesting. But what happened to those 5 hours? Did they create more revenue? Not necessarily. Did they improve customer service? Not necessarily if you're not measuring it that far. Did it reduce risk or accelerate? This is an important one, accelerate innovation, which is the frontier end of thinking right now in AI. Or did we simply create 5 hours of additional capacity? So now we've got some capacity freed up. That's why I think there are really 3 horizons of AI value. The first is efficiency. Can we do the same thing faster or cheaper? Which is what we tend to use AI. Then the second is effectiveness. Can we achieve a better business or mission outcome? Missions for public sector, business for the rest. And that's more important. Effectiveness, meaning we are not just getting efficient and using AI, we are putting it to good use. And the third, as I said, right at the leading edge, is innovation and advantage. Can this AI that we worked on enable us to do something that was previously impractical or even impossible? So while efficiency matters, I think some of the biggest AI opportunities ultimately lie in the other two, effectiveness and then innovation and advantage, not merely doing, today's work more cheaply. So the economics conversation needs to move from asking how much AI activity did we create to what actually changed as a result of doing this, because that will give you the real return.
Definitely. And how do organizations avoid ending up with lots of AI activity and productivity improvements in that case, Errol, that never translate into meaningful business value?
You're absolutely right there. For this, and I've said this before in many other platforms and forums, I think we need to reverse the conversation, because too many AI initiatives begin with, well, we have AI, where can we use it? I think the better question is, what business outcome are we trying to improve? And then work backwards. So what decisions determine that outcome? Then working backwards, what intelligence would improve those decisions? And then what AI capability can provide that intelligence? And what understanding does that AI need? And what information and context create that understanding? So we've worked backwards from business outcome through decisions, intelligence, AI capability, understanding, and then data. So the logic becomes back to decisions, back to required intelligence, back to capacity, back to context, and finally back to data. And that's what I mean by focused AI. Focused AI is deliberately applied to a defined business domain, a workflow or decision, where improving intelligence has the potential to produce a measurable business outcome. It's the difference between simply giving everybody, a generic AI assistant, and as opposed to that, designing an AI capability specifically to improve something. These include underwriting or treasury management, fraud detection, etc., etc. So we have a number of these outcomes that we see people focusing on, and that's where they achieve the real ROI. And once you've defined that, you can begin to ask what AI actually needs in order to help improve it.
For sure. Thank you. Thank you for sharing, Errol. So we've moved quite a long way from the architecture and token economics discussion in part one in terms of business value for organizations. So where does active context come back into the story?
So this is where I think the two conversations reconnect. The
True.
part one made an important point. It said
Mm-hmm.
the answer isn't necessarily giving AI less information, it's giving AI the right information, which is relevant, trusted, governed, timely. And that can improve the economics because we potentially reducing unnecessary retrieval or tokens or retries and unnecessary processing. So that's the first dimension that we covered in part one.
Mm-hmm.
You ask, where does active context come in? So the right context doesn't just potentially make AI less expensive, it has to make it, as I said, more effective. So because an AI system participating in a meaningful enterprise decision needs more than just raw data. So while making the data available is right and then the AI ready format, what they need normally is it needs to understand what does this information mean? How are these entities related? What happened previously? What's happening right now? That's the active part. What policies apply? What is this user or this agent permitted to do? That's the governance, the trust. What business rules govern this decision? That's the sovereignty. And what outcome are we actually trying to achieve? That whole thing that I just described. What does it mean? Who's involved? What are they allowed to do?
Mm-hmm.
This is all business context. So we talked about the data side of it in part one. Now we're talking about the business side of it. And that's where active context starts becoming part of the value equation, not merely the cost equations. The first one was all about cost.
Right.
This one is all about value, and active context connects both.
Interesting. Interesting point that you make there. Thanks, Errol. So does that mean organizations should simply give AI as much context as possible?
No, I don't believe that's necessary. This is where part one was exactly right. More context doesn't necessarily mean better context. So irrelevant context can mean more tokens, greater latency, meaning delays, more noise, confusion, and potentially poorer reasoning, so bad decisions. So what matters is what I'd call now, and this is a new term maybe, context effectiveness. Okay, how effective is that context? Not how we've given them as much context as we can throw at them. We're giving them effective context. How effective is this context? So is the context relevant to the decision that's being made? Then is it complete enough? Then is it current? Is it timely? Are we looking at old data, stale data? Is it trusted? Is it governed? Do these business concepts in this context still stay consistent from their meaning? What does it mean? Are we consistent with that? Because God knows there are many semantics layers out there, and they're all at odds with each other sometimes. So does it reflect the relationships, the policies, the business rules that matter to these decisions? And can the AI get to the required understanding without unnecessary retries and rework, which is what we talked about before? So instead of simply asking, how much context did AI consume in relation to, shall we just throw as much context at it as possible? We start asking, did AI receive the context necessary to understand the situation and support the right decision? That's the question. So that's an effective context, not an abundance of context, which, as I said earlier, can cause problems.
I like how you describe this and coined the term in a way, the term like context effectiveness. But there's a slight danger here though, isn't there? Like we don't want to suggest that better context automatically creates a better business outcome. What do you think?
Absolutely. Anybody who says that is exposing themselves to all kinds of comeback. No, I think we need to be very careful about that because context is not the only thing that determines an outcome. All the other things still matter. The model matters, the orchestration matters, the tools that you use for AI matter, the workflow matters. Are you, for example, if you're doing agentic AI, are you working on the right workflow and involving the right processes, etc.? Ultimately, in many of these, human judgment may matter, and therefore execution certainly matters. So I wouldn't say better context equals better business outcomes. I'd rather say if you have better context, it enables a better understanding. You have a higher chance of better understanding. And once you have better understanding, because we need to connect it to outcomes, you have better understanding that can improve decision quality. If you have better decisions, that improves better actions. And if you have better actions, then you increase the probability of better business outcomes. So again, chain becomes, active context to better understanding, from that to better decisions, from that to better actions, and then to better business outcomes. So not automatically, if you get more or better active context, you've got business outcomes. You need to go through this whole thing here and involve every moving part. So that's a much more credible way of thinking about the role of enterprise data in AI. It also explains why active context belongs in an ROI discussion. It can contribute to efficiency, as we've shown, by reducing the wasted intelligence. But more importantly, it can contribute to the effectiveness side of it by improving the understanding on which these decisions depend.
Definitely, I totally agree with you, Errol. Thank you for sharing this. So, if we put all this together, and if you were sitting with a CEO or a CFO or a CIO, what would a better model for AI economics actually look like?
Well, we've been thinking about this, and I believe we should describe it at 6 levels. So, what's level one? Token economics, which we covered. What does intelligence cost? Tokens, compute, models, infrastructure. And that's where part one began. But what's the next level up from token economics? Level 2, intelligence efficiency. We're talking about that. How efficient is this? How efficiently are we consuming that intelligence in terms of retrieval, retries? Have we reduced the number of retries? Agents, are they executing properly and well? The effort that engineering need to put in to make this happen, and then the cost per task. So intelligence efficiency, to make that intelligence available and efficient, that's level 2. Level 3 is, and I said this before, context effectiveness. How effective is this context? So does the AI have the understanding it needs in terms of relevant data, freshness, the timeliness, the active side of it, semantics, the true meaning, relationships, policies, all the things that determine the outcome, business rules. And finally, the operational state, the context at that moment in time for that organization. So that's level 3. Level 4, if you have context effectiveness, the next you measure is decision effectiveness. Now you've got the ability to make that decision. Are these decisions getting better? Are they better in quality, in accuracy, speed, consistency, and actually, very importantly, risk? Level 5, moving on from the token economics and the intelligence efficiency and effectiveness, we come to the outcome economics. Yes, there is an economics around the outcome. Did something important actually improve? Did we improve revenue or margin? Did we decrease fraud and risk? Customer retention, did we improve that? Did we reduce downtime? Did we improve working capital? Did we improve patient outcomes, citizen outcomes, etc., etc.? So those are the first top 5. Now, what's the 6th, you might ask? Those 5 seem to say it all. If you've got really good decisions and you're improving outcomes, what's level 6? This is where most organizations need to put on their thinking hats and ask this. Did AI allow the organization to do something strategically better? Meaning not something that they did again and again, but it make them go beyond just run-of-the-mill business outcomes. Could they create a new product as a result? Did they build a new service? Did they transform the customer experience in a way they've never done before? They could have created a new operating model. Maybe they'll increase their ability to learn faster than their competition. And that's where the AI starts moving beyond automation towards innovation and strategic advantage. So these 6 levels, they end with this strategic side of it. And very few companies are getting to that. And AI active context is the enabler for them to actually start on that journey to go through these 6 levels. But if they only achieve the first 5, they've done brilliantly well. If they achieve all 6, that's where they start to really realize the value. And then no amount of tokens matters because they've really generated a lot of value.
Right. This was a great overview, Errol. Thank you for sharing this. And I like how you kind of broke it down to different levels and how organizations can effectively look at this. Does it mean that organizations should stop measuring things like cost per token?
No, not at all. So definitely measure it, optimize it, but just don't mistake it for the destination. That's not the end goal. I think the economic progression looks something like this. Of course, we start with cost per token, then cost per task, then cost per useful answer that you get, then cost, and this is important, this is the first time you actually say, okay, now I've broken the mold, cost per successful decision. Once you have cost per successful decision, then you see what business outcomes, because then you've now got a cost per successful business outcome. And eventually the question becomes, what value did we create per successful business outcome? Because when you measure that, suddenly, the number of tokens you consume doesn't matter at all when you see the value of what you generated. So that's when the AI economics starts speaking the language of the business rather than simply the language of the technology.
Interesting. And I think that's the segue into the business aspect of it from the technology side. So that was a great response. Thank you, Errol. So we've gone from tokens to productivity to decisions to context and ultimately to business outcomes. So if you had to define the true ROI of AI in one sentence, what would it be? I think we're coming back, we kind of started from ROI and ending at ROI, but if you had to explain this in one sentence, the true ROI of AI, what would it be for you?
So for me, as you probably realize, it's a very simple statement. The true ROI of AI is the value of the business outcomes that AI enables relative to the total investment required to achieve them. If you look at what you spent on achieving that, and then look at the value of the true value of what you got back from it, not at savings and tokens, but at the whole business outcome value, that's the definition. The true ROI of AI is the value of the business outcomes AI enables relative to the total investment required to achieve them. And there's an important consequence of that. The cheapest AI isn't necessarily the AI with the lowest cost per token. It may be the AI that achieves the required business outcome with the least wasted intelligence and tokens and total investment. And conversely, you could have efficiency really generated as a result of that management of tokens, but producing completely the wrong outcome. That's really expensive. That's expensive AI. That's why I think the AI economics conversation has to move beyond token economics, not away from token economics, but just beyond it.
Definitely. And so, I think in part one, we discussed all about the cost of intelligence. And here in part two, we've been discussing, about the value created from the said intelligence. So what's the one thing you'd like our listeners to take away from this conversation today?
So to make it simple, don't measure how much AI you use. Measure what AI enables you to achieve. Focus there. Because while token economics matters, architecture also matters, efficiency matters, productivity matters, but organizations don't invest in AI because they want to consume tokens efficiently. They invest because they want to improve something. And that something might be a decision, a process, a customer outcome, revenue, margin, all the usual things companies worry about: risk, innovation, a patient outcome if it's healthcare, public sector. So, don't worry about how much you're spending on tokens necessarily. It is an important concept, but start with the outcome. Focus the AI on achieving that outcome. And given that AI, the trusted, relevant, and timely context, it needs to understand the business situation. If your AI doesn't understand the business situation, you can never expect AI to give you the right results. So measure the outcome that actually changed and what value that change created. And that's when we can start talking seriously about the true ROI of AI.
Definitely, Errol. And this was a great summarized version. Thank you for sharing that. And that brings us to the end of this 2-part series of our conversation today. And again, in summarizing this, initially we looked at how smarter architecture and active context can reduce the unnecessary cost of intelligence. And now we've taken a step further where we've been discussing about asking organizations how to turn that intelligence into measurable business value. So this was a wonderful conversation, and thank you again for joining us today, Errol.
Thank you, Neha. Thank you all for listening.
Wonderful. And for our listeners, thank you for tuning in to AI Data Bytes powered by Denodo. And make sure to check out our previous episode if you haven't already, the link for which will be available on this episode as well. So thank you for listening.